So with this video, I want to go through quick bullet points of what movie reviews should be like, because as I'm watching more movie reviews, I'm starting to see a lot of the same things still happening, and which is like a lot of personal feelings in the reviews. Sometimes it's what the critic wants and stuff like that. So this is like a quick overview. I didn't carefully think this out. I just basically wrote things that were on top of my head as I was watching these reviews, because I was watching a couple movies recently and then I watched the reviews after. And the reason why I tend to do that, because most of the time, if not all, I'll say nine out of 10 times, usually the critic gives away too much information or gives away important plot points. So basically, this is like a quick overview. It's not going to be everything, but this should be a good chunk of stuff that tends to happen frequent enough for me to write it down. So here we go. So the first thing I want to get into is consistencies. These are consistencies within films or stories in general. And the first bullet point I want to talk about is primary characters. So the thing is that there always will be primary characters, and there always will be one primary character within each story. Primary characters can switch with each iteration of stories, but with each story itself, there's always one primary character. And on top of that, all the other characters are secondary characters. So secondary characters' purpose is to flesh out the primary characters. So if a character in the story is not being fleshed out too much, odds are they're probably a secondary character. And this is something that's pretty much in all stories, or all good stories I should say. There's always one primary character. And the secondary characters can be like main characters in a sense. Like they're like secondary main characters. Like they're always on screen, or they have a lot of screen time. But everyone else is secondary character. And I find that when someone says, "Oh, this character wasn't fleshed out too much," or "I didn't get their personality too much," or like they didn't show too much of their personality in the movie, odds are because that's not the primary character. The primary character is to focus on. That's the main focus of the story. Is the primary character and how the story is unfolding around the primary character. The secondary characters are only there for filler. You can't just have the primary character with an empty space. Well, technically speaking, you can, but not every story is going to be like that. So keep that in mind. There's only one primary character. Even though the secondary characters might be on the screen often, only one primary character. The second point I want to get into, not all characters are meant to be liked. So with this, like some character designs are not to be liked, and sometimes the critics will say that they didn't connect with the characters. And watching a film is not always about being connected. Sometimes it's about being disconnected. And an example I have for this is ironically from a video game, Kane and Lynch. I haven't played too much of the game, but what I have played, by design, these characters are not meant to be liked. And if that's true, from what I've seen, that's what it looks like. They don't have likable traits by the public or by social standards. So therefore, by design, they're detaching themselves purposefully from the audience, and that sometimes is a method. So keep that in mind when looking at characters. Not all of them are supposed to be liked. There's two types. Remember, there's two types of emotions. There's empathy and sympathy. And not every story is about empathy, but sometimes understanding the experiences of others is the focal point of the story. So keep that in mind. Not all stories are supposed to be personal to all audiences. And sometimes they're meant to be designed to not be personal to any audience. So keep that in mind. The third point I want to get into, controlling emotions. So this is another thing that stories will do, is that they control the audience's emotion. And sometimes that's making it personal, being detached, sometimes trying to make them sad or feel empathy and make them understand why a person would be sad in that situation or happy. So when the story controls your emotions, when your emotions are triggered by the story and it's within context of the story, odds are you're supposed to feel that way. If something's uncomfortable or it's just awkward and you feel awkward and it's within context of the story, odds are the story fulfilled its purpose by making you feel awkward in an awkward situation within the story's context, what's happening at that moment. So keep that in mind. That's something that's meant to be done in stories. And one of the last things I want to talk about with consistency is cliche. Many people will say that it's a technique or it's like overusing a technique or method that's effective to the point that it's not effective no more. But I would redefine cliche by making something too perfect. And what I mean by this is that, let's say for example, there is an epic battle, and there's like let's say there's an epic battle between aliens and humans, and there's nothing lost. If there's nothing lost with on the human side or the alien side, that's cliche. Or if it's the ending is too happy, that's cliche. Or like a perfect example is James Bond. James Bond originally their thing was being cliche. So with every James Bond movie, for the most part, if he went into battle or went into a fight, not even a single hair on his head would be out of place. Now with the new James Bond, they tend to have him more like less cliche like. So he actually gets hurt, he gets damaged within these fights, which is sometimes unrealistic, even in the sense of Hollywood realism, which I'll probably get into later on. But basically, yeah, so basically what I'm trying to say is like even with that unrealistic expectations or unrealistic universes that these films create, sometimes even inspiration from real world, but they won't be completely grounded in real world to a certain sense. And especially with action films, even if it's not sci-fi. And the thing is that when that happens, you have to make it more exciting, but the cliche part of it, like there must be consequences. Even though it's not realistic, there must be some kind of consequence. The character cannot be completely perfect. So this is when it's too cliche, or if the ending's too happy, or scenes happen almost perfectly of what the protagonist wants to happen. I'm not saying something should always bad something bad always should be happening to the protagonist, but all I'm saying is that it should not always be perfect. It should be like it should be like a mystery to the audience. It shouldn't just be like, oh, that was such a happy ending, or if the audience is upset that it wasn't a happy ending, odds are that's a good ending. I'm not saying that not all happy endings are bad, and not all bad endings were in the sense of it's not happy or good, but it's all about the context and presentation and everything. But keep in mind that the way I define cliche is when things happen too perfectly. And the last thing I want to talk about is James Bond. I find that with the new James Bond, they took out a lot of things that were iconic about James Bond, and they probably should have brought in like iconic characters to make it feel more like a James Bond movie. Because if you're taking out the gadgets, you must keep something that's tangible within the IP to bring across the new adaptation besides James Bond himself. Even though James Bond is the primary character and everyone is the secondary characters, there are iconic secondary characters that are from the franchise, the IP, and not bringing them over in the sense and creating new villains kind of like detaches James Bond in a sense. So what James Bond had was the cliche. It was very cliche. but the way they presented it, people liked it. And then now they take away the clichéness of it, and they take away the gadgets and all the iconic villains. You just basically get a traditional action film. There's nothing unique about it. There's no unique flair or twist or technique about it. So that's basically it. I want to talk about with the consistencies. Then the next thing I'll be talking about is the critiquing. So with the critiquing, the first point I want to point out or talk about is critique on performance, execution, and logic, not emotion. So to a certain degree, how many critics review video games is a similar fashion how film should be reviewed. Sometimes when pointing out a scene in a film is best not to be detail oriented because it can give away important plot points. Keep in mind every scene has an importance and the story needs to be critiqued too, but try not to focus on details and focus more on performances and execution than personal feelings or emotions. Just to clarify, I mean emotions towards the decisions made in the film or story that aren't triggered from the story but triggered in the sense that you're not liking it. So I'm trying to stay away from not liking something and getting angry in the sense of it's not in your vision, then emotions being controlled by the story itself. So if it's a sad scene and you're sad, I'm not saying to not focus on your emotions being controlled by the movie in the sense that it's triggered from the story and you got invested, but it's more on the emotions independent from the film that that indirectly control your emotions because you're upset about what decisions they made, than actually critiquing the decisions they made. So I just want to create that separation because I did talk about emotions being controlled by the story. So I don't want to have like a misunderstanding. So it's just emotions that are somewhat indirectly controlled by the story, but not in context of the story. So it's like you're upset about the decisions they made because it's not based off of your decisions. Remember now, it's not your movie. You're not the director. You're critiquing their decisions, but don't critique it with using a baseline of your personal feelings or decisions that they should have made. Critique what they actually did make. So my second point is having consistency in genre logic. No matter how you define genres, you should be consistent with your genre logic if you have your own set of genres. Because I like to have consistency, and I find genres today aren't that consistent. So I redefine genres and have a consistency and stay within the consistency I create. So like a couple things to understand before I get into anything is that if something is grounded on reality, I still call it Hollywood realism. This just means that if something is grounded in science fact and is slightly exaggerated for cinematography, pacing, or excitement, so that will be the purpose of having Hollywood realism. Something common that happens in movies that isn't common in real life is breaking or shattering a vehicle window. Often in movies, a person will walk up to a vehicle and smash the window with ease. In reality, this doesn't happen as easily. You'll probably need a really strong force or multiple attempts to shatter the glass, or using some kind of object to shatter the glass easily. So this is what I consider like Hollywood realism. It's like grounded in reality, but then certain things aren't exactly grounded in reality. There's certain things that they cut corners with, and something they often cut corners with is breaking glass or windows from a vehicle. You just walk up to it and break it. It doesn't happen that way in real life, but it's commonly accepted. That's like the realism. That's why I call it Hollywood realism, because it's like movie realism, kind of like how they have game logic, how they have like barrels and stuff like that. Like it's not real even though something's grounded in reality, they still have like these logistics within the media or medium, I should say. So with the medium of films. This is the logistics of this, the optics or the common things that they do in the films that are acceptable, even though it's not grounded on reality. So going back to the genres, I'll quickly go over the genres since it's not that much, to tell you the truth. It's not like my video game genres. So the first genre is action, a universe where the protagonist or the protagonists tend to be highly gifted compared to the majority populace. Examples of this is Mission Impossible, James Bond, The Avengers. Adventure, a universe where unusual and exciting experiences or activities that generally result into discovering is the main emphasis as the story progresses. An unusual or an exciting experience or activity. Examples are Journey to the Center of the Earth or Star Trek. The last genre is drama, a universe where choice has a major consequence. And with these other genres, there are subgenres, but since these subgenres or these genres are considered subgenres in my logic of genres, I put them here. And since they're really popular and stuff, so yeah, I just put them here. So the first one is thriller, creating a high anticipation through people's actions. An example for this is Dark Country or Disturbia. Romance, creating a high anticipation through relationships. Examples are Titanic, Love Story, and Affair to Remember. Suspense, creating a high anticipation through knowledge. Movies like Salt, This Is the End. And horror, creating a high anticipation through conflicts between primal instincts versus logical choices. Examples are Audition, A Haunted House. What I just went through is filmed by story design. So the next one will be films by presentation style. So this will be animation, documentary, live action, musical, and silent. So with these styles, they can fit into any genre. Even though kid-like movies tend to be animated, animation is not fixed to a certain rating and is not fixed to a certain genre. I find that when you're looking at movies, they might list it as animation. Animation is not a genre, it's a style. So like some of the styles under animation is rotoscoping. There's like visual effects. Under that it would be like live action effects, digital animation. There's special effects, optical effects, mechanical effects with documentary or raw footage like presentation. There's participatory, observational, and expository. And since these are presentation styles, you can mix match some of these presentation styles. So you might have a documentary with special effects, or special effects is not always under animation. This is not the full list of anything. It's just a brief overview and to give you an idea. So musical can be mixed in with animation, or a silent film can be mixed with the documentary, or an animation or live action. So keep that in mind, it can be mismatched. The last thing I want to get into is films by realities. So there is comedy, a reality where realities are broken, creating a unique reality beyond fantasy, science fact, or science fiction. This is different when a film has comedy elements because this is not implying the comedy reality. There is fantasy, a reality where magic, mystical creatures, or intangible technology exists. So this is like where your superhero movies will be. There is science fact or real world, or you can call this reality. Reality loosely based off of possible real world outcomes. And science fiction is a reality where current technology is utilized in ways that may not be possible. So this is like your steampunk movies and stuff like that, where steam is the main source of fuel or energy for the current machines used in the reality that the universe created by the director. So that'll be like your steampunk, or they might have something else, and other sub-realities. And the reason why I have these segregated, because usually film realities are genres, and film realities can fit into any story design out there. Like, for example, a film can have a science fiction drama, or it can have a science fiction action, or an adventure, or it can be a science fiction horror. Kind of like Dead Space. Dead Space is a science fiction horror. It's not. It's like in space, and it's in like in a scary ship, a spaceship. So that'll be like an example of that. It can be like a science fiction romance. Maybe it's like two aliens or something, or maybe it's just futuristic humans in an environment. It just implies the reality that they live in. It doesn't imply the story design that the director wants to convey. So keep that in mind. Sci-fi is not story design. It's reality. It's a reality. Now for my other points, staying within context of the film logic. So this may sound like common sense, but for the most part, many people try to answer questions beyond the scope of the film. So if this wasn't answered, it wasn't the focal point of the director or the story. And if you wanted that answered, is because you got so invested into the story or character that you want to know the character more. So this is more like a personal thing than a illogical thing. Or sometimes it might be case by case depending on the story, but generally speaking, if it's not in the story, or if you can't find anything within context or in scope of the film, then it wasn't that important. Or sometimes it might draw, maybe it was important, but not in the sense that you may think. It might be like an audience thing, controlling the audience or confusing the audience, or stuff like that. Sometimes they throw curveballs at the audience, so stuff like that might happen. But in overall sense, if it's not answered, it might not. Odds are it's probably not that. It's not the focal point of the story, or not the focal point of this film. This next point is kind of funny, but I'm surprised no one doesn't pick up on this. But stop saying there's a plot twist. Saying that there's a plot twist in a movie is giving away the movie, because a twist is a complete change in direction to what the characters in the story, to what is presented to logically follow. Basically, a plot twist is a paradigm shift from making the audience thinking one character is the prime character to a false reality. So this just basically means that maybe throughout the film, the audience is led in one direction, and all of a sudden it changes to another direction. But when you say there's a plot twist, then they're expecting a complete change. That kind of ruins the plot twist. By saying there's a plot twist, you ruin the plot twist. Like, it's redundant, and I don't know why people do this, but they do it. They'll say there's like 3 plot twists in the movie. Sometimes the director says it in like, for example, in the Terminator, the new Terminator Genesis. There's a clip of the director talking. He's like, "There's so many plot twists. There's so many twists and directions here." Why would you say that? If that's part of the experience, that's like telling me the ending to the movie. It's just as bad. So stop saying there's a plot twist in the movie or film, because it ruins the plot twist. So my next point, sorry if this is like a rant, but it somewhat is, somewhat isn't. But my next point is, not everything is going to be memorable by nature. This is an important thing to understand, because if something is not memorable, it does not mean it's not worth watching. This is somewhat going back to psychology, where a stimuli of one individual will be different from another. The point of a review is to analyze the story in tandem of the presentation, not if it will be some classic movie for you. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that not everything is going to be memorable, because everyone has different stimuli. If it's not memorable to you, it does not mean it's not going to be memorable to someone else. The point of critiquing is not to critique whether how memorable certain events are in a film to you. You're critiquing the presentation, the logic of the story, how things unfold, the performance. If it's not memorable to you, it does not mean it's a bad film. Being not being memorable is nothing to do with the quality of the film. It has to do mostly with the individual, not the film. My next point, reviews are at review, meaning that you watch it again. So this means that the best reviews are the types of reviews that where the critic watches a film more than once. When a critic doesn't get the film, this is often means that they need to watch the content again, or they weren't following close enough. So if a person doesn't get the story, it feels convoluted, watch it again until you get the story. If you don't get the story and you're following logically, then maybe there is something wrong. But odds are stories follow logically. You can't really create a story that's not following logically. That makes no sense in itself. Like every story has some kind of following. Even if you're a bad storyteller, it's still going to be logic. It's going to be logical. It's not going to be that convoluted. It's just more, usually when it comes to films, it's usually more on the individual not getting it the first time. Usually you have to get it a second time. And this can be valid. This is like a case by case thing, but usually 9 times out of 10 is because the critic needs to watch the content again. Not everything is going to be seen within one view. I guarantee you that. No matter how observant you may think you are, not everything is going to be noticeable with the first time going through. Especially when you watch it a second time, where you know what the story is about, then you're going to try to connect the things the second time around. So when you watch it again, the more times you watch it, the easier it becomes, because you don't have to remember as much as you did the first time, because now certain things are committed to memory. So now you can look at other things that might be interesting to you, that were interesting to you the first time, but not the second time, because now you already saw that and you want to see what else happened at that moment when you were looking at something else or whatever. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is usually watching content multiple times, you will get it. And odds are you may not get the content the first time around. So my next point is kind of a major pet peeve, and it's why I tend to watch reviews after watching the content. And that is, synopsis should stay within the first 30 minutes or less. What does this mean? So basically, what happens in the first 30 minutes or less from the beginning of the film, that should be the synopsis. Do not pick certain elements beyond that point, especially near the end, because you ruin the movie. So if it's like you're watching a movie and near the end they find out that it's not real, do not put in the synopsis that these are a group of teenagers. They're in a cabin or something, and they and things are not real, but they don't know that. If you don't know that in the first 30 minutes, then that's something that is important to the story, and then you're ruining it for the audience, because the audience it's the experience that the audience must go through, especially if it's not revealed within the first 30 minutes. If it's not revealed in the first 30 minutes, it's something that should be revealed later on as an important plot point. Do not include that in the synopsis. If you do, you ruin the movie. It's like the plot twist thing. Do not say there's a plot twist, because it ruins a plot twist. Do not pick certain plot points in the movie towards the end as a synopsis. If you don't know that in the first 30 minutes, it's something you should not know when going into the movie. I don't get this. And these are avid movie critics. They do this a lot. They will look at a synopsis, and they tell you something that you will find out in the last maybe 20 minutes of the film. Like, it ruins the film, and you go watch the film and you're like looking, what are they talking about? This doesn't happen. And then you find out near the end, oh, I see, like, or maybe towards the end you're starting to get it. The review should not ruin it or help predict what's going to happen within the film. Once you do that, you ruin it. So this is why I tend to watch reviews after watching content, not before, which kind of defeats the purpose of the review. And one last thing I want to point out, I'm using 30 minutes as a guesstimate, but depending on how long the film is, but basically the cutoff point of the synopsis is basically after certain events start changing, because a movie is when an event changes in a particular person's life or whatever it's about. When something slightly changes, that's where the synopsis should end. That's it. If it's like a group of kids in the cabin, that's it. Group of kids in the cabin, and a series of events starts picking up there, or there's like group of kids from high school. Could give a little bit of context, but don't go beyond the series of events that start changing. Like, once the first change happens, stop. And usually this is within the first 30 minutes. So if a movie is like 30 minutes, because a short film is 30 minutes, don't give away the movie. Like, use common sense, use judgment. So maybe if it's 30 minutes, maybe the first 5 minutes, like, give it judgment. Use your own judgment, I mean. So the first 30 minutes is just a guesstimate for most movies, since most movies are 2 hours, 3 hours long now. So keep that in mind, adjust it accordingly. So with my last point, is probably like the most, how would I put this, the most influential point of the whole video, is that it's not your story. So this is like a major problem, especially with the gaming community. They always want to put in certain things in the story, and it's not your story. You have to critique what is there. Like, my review for video games is very similar to movies and films. However you want to say it. I usually use films interchangeably and stuff like that in common conversation, but that's besides the point. It's not your story. If you don't like for example, I don't like Spider-Man having artificial webbing. I like organic webbing because it makes more sense, because you're not a Spider-Man if you don't have organic webbing. But in the comics, that's how it was. It's not your story. So I can't like knock Spider-Man because he doesn't have organic webbing, or like stuff like that. Like, it's not your story. If you don't want Spider-Man to be kissing Mary Jane at this scene, again, not your story. Like, you're not the director. You're all you're doing is critiquing the series of events and presentation and execution in the story. Try not to take it as a personal hit to you. Remember, now, it's not your story. I understand you might invest a lot in the character. You might love, I don't know, Deadpool. You might love Wolverine, Cyclops. But if you don't like what they did to the character, it's not a bad movie because they changed it, or or it's not in your vision. Spider-Man's not in my vision, but it doesn't change the fact that The Amazing Spider-Man is a good movie. I don't like how it's not organic, it's artificial, but it's still a good movie. So you have to understand, you have to put yourself aside, your personal fan fiction, and take it for what it is. It's not your story. So one thing I find that doesn't make sense, I find illogical even inside the universe created, is Superman. Like, his disguise is plastic frame glasses. The black plastic frame glasses. And this makes no sense because there'll be secondary characters with glasses, they'll take off their glasses and people still recognize them. But for some reason, Superman's not recognized. That makes no sense. No matter where you look at that, whether it's true to the comics or what, makes no sense. I don't get it. But then you will see another person with glasses in the same universe taking off their glasses, and they still recognize that person. But for some reason, Superman, people don't recognize him when he puts on prescription-like glasses. These aren't sunglasses, these are prescription glasses. Well, it's prescription-like since he can see perfectly, so they're false. But it doesn't change how you look. Like to the extent that people won't recognize you. That makes no sense. But that's the end of the video. I don't want it to be too long because I make long videos. But that's my spiel on films and reviews. It's an overview, a little bit of a rant. I'm done. TX3 out.